for this occasion, we are sitting here on the launching of the regional economic outlook on sub-Saharan Africa, together with the outreach event from the UN in collaboration with the government. So my role as a UN resident coordinator in the Gambia, I'm here to welcome you all, to thank you for coming, but also to really call for vibrant participation today to this event, which is addressing a key issue in the Gambia for the time being. We all know in the recent years that the world has witnessed unprecedented challenges in the form of climate change. We face the COVID-19 pandemic and the unfortunate Russia-Ukraine war, which have directly and indirectly affected the lives and livelihoods of people across the world, with the Gambia being no exception. And in recent months, inflation has increased faster and more persistently than previously anticipated, pushing up the prices of essential commodities such as food, fuel, and fertilizer, which comprise a significant part of the country's imports. The high cost of living continues to affect millions of people with regards to realizing their basic economic, social, and cultural needs. For example, acute food insecurity, which has negative implications on access to food. Additionally, the high cost of living could weigh on economic growth and undermine social and political stability, as witnessed in several countries in the region. Given the global crisis and the situation in the Gambia, the United Nations country team, in close partnership with the IMF, wanted to hold this dialogue with various stakeholders in the Gambia to discuss the cost of living and collectively discuss possible ways of addressing it. The in-country launching of the IMF's October 2022 Regional Economic Outlook for Sub-Saharan Africa on the theme Living on the Edge, which highlights the impact on the region of the war in Ukraine, induced global slowdown, tight financial conditions, and high inflation, offered the right platform to engage this dialogue on the drivers of inflation and the food security situation in the Gambia. And today, we are offering the possibility of hearing various stakeholders, including the civil society, private sector, academia, and the authorities, on how they are responding to these challenges with the view of identifying practical policy measures to help collectively navigate these trying moments. As a highly import-dependent economy, the Gambian economy rests on a narrow productive base, characterized by frequent downturns due to its exposure to adverse shocks, such as the droughts and the external shocks. In the Gambia, the service sector is dominant, with the secondary and primary sectors almost equivalent. And over the past decade, the economy has endured a number of downturns, such as the drought in 2011. We saw the political impasse in 2017, COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently, the Ukraine war. These episodes have posed serious economic challenges to the population, reversing the gains the Gambia has made in reducing poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and inequality. We must ensure we do more, because every time there is a shock, the few gains we made are reversed. Distinguished participants, as we interact today, let us reflect on both short-term and long-term ways of resolving the current problems. In line with the principle of leaving no one behind, short-term measures should seek to address the conditions of the most vulnerable in the society, including women, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons. On the other hand, longer-term measures should seek to better position the country on a more resilient and sustainable growth to ensure the economy from future shocks. We must adopt long-term climate-neutral development strategies to achieve this goal. International support to address ongoing challenges, including food insecurity and the green energy transition, remains essential, and the UN, together with its partners, will continue to support the government and people of the Gambia during these times. I urge you all to make good use of this crucial dialogue to help the Gambia face up to some of the challenges posed by inflation, as we will hear from development partners, government, civil society, academia, and the private sector on how we can swiftly address this challenge. I urge you to think creatively on how, even during these difficult times, we can leverage the Gambian strong social fabric to help strengthen peace and harmony so the Gambia emerges stronger than ever from the current global crisis. I'm optimistic that after today's deliberations, we will be ready to build more prosperous, greener future for the country and the world. I thank you all for your kind attention and welcome again to this event. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to grace this occasion and to welcome you all as the IMF launches this crucial and timely regional economic outlook. The themes living on the edge and managing the high cost of living and food insecurity in the Gambia cannot be more relevant under the current economic conditions as we grapple with the shocks of the Russia-Ukraine war without having fully recovered from the shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting in higher commodity prices. As the living costs surge across the globe, with the sub-Saharan Africa not an exception, this has exerted triple impact on society and governments across the region. First, the rising cost of basic essential commodities has eroded gains in the social safety nets. Secondly, increased the cost of government projects and programs, as well as eroded the much-needed revenue to support the critical public service delivery in the low-income countries. These challenges have been further exacerbated by the monetary policy reversals in the advanced economy, principally the United States, putting undue pressure on all currencies, particularly the Gambian dollars. It must be noted that the United States dollar has strengthened against all major currencies, and the Gambian dollars is not an exception. That being the case, we import 90% of our consumption, and the increased inflation is mainly through imported inflations. This is further strengthened by this week tightening of the Fed by 75 basis points, and Jeremy Powell saying that it's not yet, the end is not yet in sight. So we're going to be on a very bumpy ride. During these challenging times, the growth outlook for the country is projected to reach 4.5% in 2022, supported by improved agricultural productivity and also with a cautiously optimistic outlook for the tourism sector. Whilst we remain humbled by these achievements so far registered in our domestic environment, I want to express our resolve to an all-inclusive recovery that will leverage on sound and prudent macroeconomic policies to support domestic productive capability to mitigate the impact of global commodity prices. To this end, the government has already started the implementation of agricultural projects together with the development partners, particularly the Rus and Giraffe, to support productivity, modernization, and value addition of local production. Similarly, the tourism sector has commenced the tourism sector resilient and diversification project, which will further enhance inclusive growth and job creation to build the necessary structures of growth in this important sector. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the earlier mentioned projects and other government initiatives in this area of developmental priorities will further spur the growth trajectory and will be supported through our digitalization to spur efficiency and public service delivery. The ongoing surge in food and energy prices are impacting the region's most vulnerable, and the public debt and inflation are at elevated levels not seen in the last couple of decades. This has left many countries, particularly the Gambia, with a very narrow base and precarious options. Yet, the government of the Gambia remains committed to structural reforms that will engender the turnaround on the rising level of vulnerabilities and increased risk of debt distress. To this end, the Gambia government will strengthen the necessary institutional structures to ensure several safety programs are conducted in a more targeted approach going forward. So far, the government has implemented several initiatives to support the vulnerable groups from the impact of the rising food and energy prices. A 20% discount on custom valuation rates on the import of all basic and essential commodities is in place, and we've also further expanded the NAFA cash transfer scheme in partnership with the World Bank to improve payments and also improve payment methodology to reach the most remotest part of the country through mobile payment systems. To conclude, the foundation of our recovery will continue to be anchored on strategic reforms in the area of public procurement to strengthen value for money, regulation and oversight, the revision of the Public Finance Act to improve public financial management structures, revision of the state-owned enterprise bill to ensure value for money and efficient public service delivery by these enterprises, improve administrative and financial governances across all the SOE environment. With that said, we look forward to insightful discussion this session will provide, and we look forward to ideas and suggestions that will support us in our development drive. With that, I thank you all.
In helping to understand the causes of the high cost of living in the Gambia, so that we open a discussion that will help us all understand the situation, but also try to find common solutions to help the country go through this trying moment. So this regional economic outlook have the team living on the edge. It seems a little bit worrisome, but it's a translation of the manifestation of many of the risks that we highlighted in our April 2022 report on the team, another shock and little room to maneuver. So the region is confronted with significant risk and challenges surrounding the region. And in this presentation, I will go through those challenges and then propose on our policy recommendations. So we have a global environment that is characterized by a shifting and a tumultuous global environment. This is characterized at the global level by a global slowdown. We have been seeing growth around the world declining. And in our last World Economic Outlook, we had a revision of the 2022 growth, represented by those bar in blue, by 0.4% in 2022 and 0.9% in 2023. These significant revisions due particularly to large revisions in advanced economies that are confronted with various challenges, the high inflation, and the tightening of financial conditions due to the normalization of the monetary policy in advanced economies. and we're still confronted with the global supply chain that is now defined with more and more polarized world. The second global risk that we have is volatility of commodity prices. Commodity prices this year have been very volatile. At the onset of the war in Ukraine, we observed a huge increase in wheat and oil prices. Those prices have now declined to the level of the pre-war, but because of the appreciation of the US dollars in domestic currency, those prices still remain very high. We have also observed a capital outflow in the region. Because of the high inflation that we have observed in advanced economies, central banks are increasing and rapidly their interest rate. This is causing capital to flow from emerging markets and the developing economies toward the advanced economies. So in sub-Saharan Africa, looking at the chart, the capital outflow that was observed in the second quarter of 2022, both on the equity and the bond market, is now similar to what was observed at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, but also also during the commodity shock of 2015. In the Gambia, a country that we don't have access to market, but we have seen that pressure also translating into lower remittances. Remittances from January to September declined by 11% compared to what was observed last year. This is putting pressure on the exchange rate. So exchange rates have been weakening against the US dollars across the region. But looking at it using the real exchange rate, we realize that there is not region-wide depreciation of real exchange rate. For countries that have fixed exchange rate, usually pegged with the euro, the inflation in those countries have been very low. So this is causing a real depreciation of exchange rate, as shown on the chart, the first chart on the left. For countries that have flexible exchange rate, in those we have real exchange rate appreciation. And this is more marked in countries that are commodity exporters, benefiting from the high commodity prices. So they still have the exchange rate is stronger, but with the inflation, they are having real exchange rate appreciation. The second category of country is countries that have resisted the nominal depreciation through intervention, FX intervention in the market. And these are leading those countries to lose some reserve. The third category are the countries with high inflation. High inflation actually will create a real appreciation of the currency. We have these global factors are associated with an increasing domestic imbalances. The high food prices and the energy prices have led to high inflation in several countries. And that is more pronounced in countries with flexible exchange rate, as shown in the first chart. 40% of the region, the countries in the region right now have double digit inflation. This is the case of the Gambia since April, but we will have the pleasure to follow another presentation that will dive down on the Gambia. The inflation trend observed also in the Gambia is not only proper to Gambia, it's similar to what is observed outside. I mean, the region is also similar to what is observed elsewhere, with the inflation increasing more rapidly and more persistently than have been expected. Now, how inflation is also associated by a deterioration of the fiscal positions. This is because of the pandemic. During the pandemic, with low activities, revenue remobilization have been constrained, but at the same time, spending have been very high, given the need to respond to the pandemic, but also all the shocks that have followed. So this is leading to high debt vulnerability in the region. Looking at the result of the low-income countries' debt sustainability analysis conducted by the IMF and the World Bank, 19 out of the 25 countries are now in high risk of debt distress, 13 of them, including the Gambia, and 6 are in debt distress. The debt levels also have been increasing very rapidly to a level that you can see on the chart. It's widespread. It's affecting almost all regions. There will be a presentation also on that for the Gambia. Ideally, what policymakers should do is to let the global prices pass through to domestic prices and then do targeted support to the most vulnerable. But in practice, many sub-Saharan African countries don't have the social infrastructure or the administrative capacities, and also you have a prevalent dominance of informal sector to apply those targeted policies. So many resorted in untargeted, costly, distortionary fiscal and support measures, such as the fuel price subsidies, tax rebates, and price control. These emergency measures need to be gradually phased out as they are putting a lot of strain on budget. Policy number 2 is how to strengthen fiscal policy. Fiscal policy has been appropriately supportive during the pandemic, responding to the people's need. But with the rise in debt levels and tightening financial conditions, public finance is coming under a lot of strain. We still have few countries represented here by the gray bolts, and those countries still have some fiscal space. And that fiscal space needs to be used to make the much needed investment on human capital and physical capital that was significantly affected during the pandemic to address their development needs. But for countries with high debt vulnerabilities, stabilizing the debt will require significant effort in 3 areas. Number 1 is to consolidate public finance, and that consolidation will need strengthening revenue mobilization. And number 2 is to prioritize spending where possible and improve the efficiency of public spending. Number 2 is to have a credible and clearly articulated medium-term fiscal framework. This gives assurance of the funders of the budget, say banks for the case of the Gambia, but the capital market for countries that have access to market, so that they have a fair pricing of their debt. The third is to ensure an effective public debt management. For some countries, this consolidation alone will not be enough, so debt reprofiling and restructuring might be needed. The priority number 3 is how to manage the shift in monetary policy to monetary policy to combat inflation. Many countries are shown on the chart. Many central bankers have already started to increase the interest rate to combat the inflation. But given the fragility of the recovery, the increase of interest rate needs to be gradual with while monitoring the secondary impact of the increase of the interest rate. But for countries experiencing high inflation, have less credible monetary frameworks, policy frameworks, subject to large capital outflow or large movement on their currency, the tightening monetary policy need to be accelerated. The priority number 4, which is the last one, is how to ensure a sustainable and greener growth to achieve a high quality growth. This will require an investment in 2 areas. In investing in resilience and good infrastructure to capitalize on the region's sizable endowment in renewable energy. And the second is how to improve the condition for private sector development. And all this will require an international support to finance the climate adaptation, because the need for climate adaptation in Africa is large, 30 to 50 billion per year. But also there are a lot of financing in that area, but only a small piece is coming to sub-Saharan Africa. So we hope with the COP27 held in Africa, they will be able to attract more of those funding. Now, still on international solidarity, for the IMF, we have been doing a lot. As shown on the map, we have programmed disbursement with all the countries that are shaded in light blue, which is around 22 countries. And we are in program negotiation with 12 countries, those are in orange. We provided in the last 3 years, between 2020 and 2022, about 50 billion US dollars, including the SDR allocation that take almost half of it. But this represents more than what we have given to the region between 1990 and 2019. So the last 30 years. We give in 3 years almost what we give in 30 years, showing how responsive we are to the challenges the region is facing. For the Gambia, we expect Gambia to receive from the IMF between 2020 and 2022, 208 million, of which 85 million was given as part of the SDR allocation. Part of it was used to help support urban development in the Gambia. So we are also working closely with the World Bank, the UN, and other partners, and I'm happy that they are all here at the global level, but also at the local level, to make sure that we provide more support to the region, particularly the countries that are most vulnerable. We have been also very agile and created 2 new instruments to respond to the current challenges the region facing. Number 1 is the long-term financing tool that we have created called the Resilience and Sustainability Trust to help finance the climate adaptation, but also the pandemic preparedness. We have recently created an energy and food security to help respond to the food security challenges facing by countries that doesn't have a program with the fund. Because if you have a program, you can always increase and give you that. So I will stop here and thank you all for your attention, and I'm looking forward for a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office here in the Gambia. And I would like to spend the next 8 minutes talking of inflation in the Gambia caused by the combined effects of the COVID pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. Global inflation started rising during the pandemic because shipping costs went up by 500%. The Russia-Ukraine war has made things worse. Russia and Ukraine are big food and oil exporters, but the 2 countries stopped exporting when the war started, causing major shortages of food and oil worldwide. As a result, food and oil prices rose sharply globally. For example, the FAO estimates that food prices have gone up 16% ever since the war started, while the IAEA estimates that oil prices have gone up 30%. These effects have triggered massive protests and strikes worldwide. Like elsewhere in the world, food prices and the prices of other necessities have soared in the Gambia. Let's say, for example, cooking oil, which has increased 49% since the start of the pandemic, or sugar, which has increased 23%, or vegetables, which have increased by 20%. According to GBOS data, it is not just food prices that have gone up. Education costs have increased 110%, healthcare costs have increased by 43%, rental costs gone up by 36%, and transportation costs have gone up by 25%. These 5 goods and services that I've mentioned make up 78% of Gambia's inflation basket. Now, what this means is that 8 out of every 10 goods and services that Gambians buy frequently have increased by more than 25%, negatively affecting people's lives. Ladies and gentlemen, the natural question that comes from all of this is, what is the way forward? How do you deal with this? I don't have the answer, but what I know is this is a global problem. This means that no single government can deal with the problem alone. Rather, it is more worthwhile if civil society, development partners, private sector come together, led by government, hold a dialogue and develop a master plan of what to do. It's important that everybody gets to understand what government is doing. It's equally important that government gets to understand what people are going through, hearing it from civil society organizations. Equally important is for government to understand what is happening to the private sector and the problems that the private sector is facing. Similarly, it's important for development partners to hear what government is doing, what the private sector is doing, and also for the other partners to hear what the development partners can offer. That can only happen through dialogue, multi-stakeholder dialogue that comes up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time.
If they have to meet the food need, they need to use some irreversible coping strategies, mean using productive assets that really harm the capacity to produce. Let's look at the geographic distribution of food insecurity across the country. What we can see here in Central River region is actually most affected by food insecurity. You have almost more than 1 out of 2 households that are food insecure. And the drivers, you have poor agricultural production, limited access to input. I will come to that, your dry spell and saltwater intrusion. That really is a kind of harming the capacity of household to produce what they need. And we know all the actual high food prices that households are facing. We have similar situation, but less pronounced in Kirwan, Basse, and Mansakoko. Let's look at the trend of food insecurity in the country in the last 10 years. When we compare with last year, we know last year around end of 2021, food insecurity were around 13%. And we know the pandemic was there with all the measures that was taken to, to limit the spread of the disease that affect the economy. Compared to now, we have food insecurity increasing, double, 25% to 26%. When we compare with the last 10 years, we have the same trend. food insecurity really has doubled here in the country. And when you compare with 2011, which was a year that affected most of the Saharan countries, like we have the drought, it was 10%, and compared to now, it means that the situation we are facing actually is worse when we compare with precedent situation that affected the country. Let's look at now what are the key shocks that affected household capacity to have access to food. You know, this is part of the information we collect from household. What we have seen coming from most of the household that were surveyed during this, that was interviewed during the survey, high food prices is the main shock that limit our capacity to have access to food. But now you have in some region loss of employment and reduced income, which is coming, like in Brikama, Kanifing, Basse, Banjul, and as well heavy rain, like the floods. But because a lot of households, according to NDMA, around 40,000 people were affected by flooding this year. And you see Banjul, Brikama, Kanifing, it's coming. It's from the household. This is affecting our capacity to have access to enough food. So let's look now the food inflation trend. When we observe last quarter of 2021, from September to March, first quarter of this year, 2022, we see inflation around 8 to 10%, still very high, but stabilize around that, you know, around this this bracket. But from March, we have seen an increase of inflation around 15%. Now stable around 15% to the last August 2022. Really, and this is really, I mean, we don't need to explain. We are seeing the impact of the global crisis, what is happening in Ukraine. And when we look at our data, we from GBOS actually monitoring some key commodities like fuel, meat, vegetable, dry bean. When we compare with last year, we have an increase, double digit as highlighted by IMF rep. And when we compare with last 5 years, we have the same trend, very high. And even some commodity like dry bean, you know, the price doubling, which is really alarming, affecting household capacity to have access to food. And now, something we should not going to be very, which is adding,
but also maintain. First, it is a pleasure to give lesson to my economics friend here. First, it was Adam Smith during the Industrial Revolution, amid time of child labor, disease, extreme poverty, just like ours, that he expounded on his concept of the invisible hand, about how automatically there is a balance between supply and demand. It was also, more importantly, in similar times of great suffering and unemployment that Keynes came up with his theory of incentive to invest. And he expounded that where necessary, the Treasury then in England can put banknotes in bottles and hide them all around the country so that people would go around finding this thing and be paid for it, just to ensure that there is employment at the bottom of the economic pyramid. I think I would recommend the same to my brother here, Abdullah Jallo. I didn't know he changed his name, but first deputy governor. I think that was a brilliant idea from Keynes, and I think we should. But more importantly, Keynes recognized that the overall macro environment, government has a big role to play. The free market is not very free. And he determines that there are two important things that influence the environment where our environment, where business operates, that is fiscal policy and monetary policy. After the Second World War, of course, the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank, that have invited us here today, were formed, and they have contributed greatly to the reduction of poverty all over the world, especially in Asia and in China mainly. What I'm trying to explain in this very long introduction is that people are creative. Rather than we have some prescribed solution, and every day we are trying to restructure our reality to fit so that you can solve them. I don't think the world works in that way. In the situation today we are faced with, this is at this time, what we have seen happening is one of the most existential threats to the order that we have in Africa. In the Gambia, we also tend to forget that we're coming from very difficult authoritarian situation for almost 3 decades. Whilst we have observed human and political gains from 2016 to date, these are very important things. We all came from very hard period in the Gambia. But I think we should focus to ensure that there are also gains in the economic and social lives of the people. Otherwise, the political gains would be meaningless under these circumstances. The Gambia have performed better than most after the COVID, despite our lack of medical infrastructure. We don't have soft, we don't have hard infrastructure, but we came out of COVID much better than most countries. And why? And I'm happy that the Vice President is here, because we did this thing through successful social solidarity, in the spirit of solidarity between the government, the private sector, and the community. And I noticed that this time we are not having the same approach that was very helpful during the peak of the COVID. The National Business Council was meeting, chaired by the Vice President, almost every weekend. So things didn't happen naturally. There is time that we need leadership to arise. This is not only a government problem. Where we are is also the problem of the community. I just wanted to say that this is just a truism that every society produces their own specific vulnerability. The vulnerability we have today is that the standard of living is very low. Therefore, any type of thing that happens in the market, any variation affects people in a big way. Therefore, our big challenge is the eradication of poverty together with our partners. And this I summarize in four things. One, the high inflation rate, especially food inflation. 2, the high unemployment rate. 3 is the supply chain constraint. And 4, energy insecurity. On the inflation, it suffices to quote just the World Bank and all that we know. I will not make a quote. But I want to contend, in times like this, we have to innovate. Inflation in the Gambia is purely and directly linked to the depreciation of the dollar. So let's just face that reality that while solving this inflation, especially where we are now, we have to be able to find how do we manage the continuous depreciation of the dollar. The dollar in 20 years ago was 30. Today, $30 to the dollar. But today it is $60. Even if there was no inflation in the world, zero inflation of all these food items, there will be inflation in the Gambia, because the salaries and the income of the Gambians didn't sort of like match the depreciation of the dollar. That is the elephant in the room, and that to a large extent is the role of the government, because the government creates like I said, the environment, the location, for location Gambia to be interesting for investment, therefore value creation and employment. The government has a big role, but we have extended our hands many times that we want to participate, because where there is no communication, there will be confusion. And after confusion is conflict, because business is always about sentiment. We have seen capital moving away from Africa in a big way. And without capital, we will not develop. But we have been here before. For the people that are older than myself and the first deputy governor, in 1985, the Gambia inflation rate was of the order of about 60%. It was highest. There were commodity stockouts all over the country. And boldly, that was our bihag moment. Jawara took the bold step of accepting the ARP. And within 1 year, a country that was a basket case, that people have written before that is the birth of an improvable nation, entered the Gambia, a book that was banned here. Gambia came out of the 1995-96 problems in a big way that we became a role model for the World Bank. Countries were coming to the Gambia to learn how we manage both the fiscal environment and how we manage this thing. So I'm just hoping that we will go back to this thing. Our worry at the business sector, I think it was the IMF, Mr. Bari, who talked about that this untargeted intervention that we do during times like this, some of it is worrying about the Gambia. The major reason we came out of the ARP, it was adopting the floating rate mechanism. And of late, I don't know, between the different organisms of government, we are of the perception that the government, we understand their limitation, we understand why, but we should not panic. We can solve it. They're going back to reference rating. Reference rate is purely a reference rate. It has nothing to do with reality. It is like fixing a rate. So there are two things that can happen. If you want to use that, the central bank must develop mechanism to ensure that this is done in real time, that it reflects the market. Otherwise, it tantamounts to going back to the fixed rates that brought us economic collapse in the 90s. I think another opportunity to innovate. 40% of Gambian import is mainly oil and minerals, oil related. And all these things come from the safer zone. If you look at today, all our petroleum imports, they come from either Abidjan or from Togo. So I'm just saying that if you make that observation that most of the dollar pressure that we're looking for is to spend it in safer zone, I mean, then we should think maybe we should just join the safer zone. No, that's just but I'm just saying that there are numerous opportunities to innovate. And times when people are uncomfortable, times like this are beautiful times to have studied economics, because the next Bernard Keynes is waiting to be born, and we hope that he'll be born in the Gambia. And when I just turned around, I saw El Haji Charno. He will tell you that Gambia had to deliberately export policy to manage the dollar. Since then, we have abandoned these things. But we are also telling both the monetary and fiscal central bank, let us sit down as a nation and reinvent, because we were in a worse situation. In '85, we were in a worse situation during COVID. But in a spirit of partnership, we were able to achieve a lot. I'll be very quick here, because on the issue of food insecurity, I think we should start talking about food sovereignty, because what Ukraine has shown is that we cannot move food from the areas they are being produced to the areas where they are being consumed. So it's not really a food insecurity problem, because if you have money, you can buy food. So we have to change and talk about being able to produce what we eat, because that is becoming more and more a problem. And I'm also hoping that the state will work with us, both the Ministry of Trade, Agriculture. There is a danger to just focus on mass production. On employment, the youth bulge is our biggest problem in the Gambia. We should think about production by the masses. We cannot leave them alone. So however brilliant you are, you will have the same contradictions that led to all the insecurities we are seeing in West Africa. And when Europe did the same also, so let us try to empower our people to have a living. rather than finding only mechanisms to be able to feed them, where they will not have the buying power to buy those foods that will be produced locally. It tantamounts to the same thing. On the issue of energy security, also I will quote the World Bank. We said that 90% of power generation in Africa uses liquid fuels that are imported, and that in the Gambia, the average tariff is 23 cents per kilowatt, and it's one of the highest in the world. So it's the World Bank. I have a friend of mine who said that if you are not very wise, have just a wise friend, and sometimes you just quote them from time to time. Like Mr. Jallo is my friend, so I like to quote him. But I think the problem in Africa is not energy insecurity, just like food. Our problem is energy idiocy. I think we should start in the abundance of water. Bob Marley said, the food is tasty. We have so much sunshine that it is shameful that we are talking about an energy problem. What energy problem? We are in the midst of the biggest energy supply in the world. So I'm just also saying the government must adapt, because I don't know, I want to say things without preference. Off-grid and microgrid solutions all over. We stop having street lights using electricity. We even pay people to stop to have solar lights in their home. We have to manage this energy demand in a way that we have abundance that is free. And just to conclude, I was just saying that yes, we should focus on eating what we grow, change our food pattern, and growing what we eat. It doesn't have to be rice or anything. Thank you very much.
A picture of gloom and despair. Like a broken record, we continue and have heard and continue to hear of the devastating impact of COVID-19 and the Russian and Ukrainian war that has wreaked havoc upon our world, and most especially upon our dear motherland, the Gambia. We the people understand all that. We understand that it might and will even get worse. We understand that prices will continue to go up. We understand the challenges of the private sector, taxes that continue to suffocate their businesses, the long delays in clearing their goods at the ports, thereby costing them invaluable resources. We understand the frustration of food dragging in the public sector in the guise to further bleed you dry, members of the private sector. We understand that we will have to make some adjustments and sacrifices here and there. We understand that what used to be cannot continue on the basis of business as usual. We applaud the government for strides that have been taken to mitigate these challenges as articulated by the Honorable Minister here. However, what we do not understand is that with these challenges, we continue to see incomprehensible spendings from this same government. We were brought up and taught that you must cut your coat according to your size. And some have gone to the extent to say cut it according to the piece of cloth that you have. Sometimes the only challenge is the cloth may be too small and you may be exposed. But it makes no economic sense to be facing these bleak realities, yet we see travels that go beyond the roof. For instance, a few months ago, a few weeks ago, over 30 officials traveled to the UN. 30 people multiplied by a conservative 250 pounds per person for 7 days by a reserved exchange rate of $60 to the pound comes to 3,150,000 $6,000 minus plane tickets. Yet in this same country, we do not have basic drug testing facility, and has costed us 70 innocent lives. Can this government tell us from 2017 to today how much has been spent per minister per travel, in per diems, in air tickets? I challenge you, the journalists, go and do research. Let's have a tabulation. Could that money not have been used for the basic necessities of the Gambian people? 70 lives that could definitely and would definitely have grown up to become our scientists and our politicians have gone unanswered. What we do not understand is that numerous allegations of corruption in this country continue to go unattended. What we do not understand is that after 57 years of post-independence, we cannot feed ourselves. Our women continue to die at childbirth. Local businesses continue to shrink. A nation where the meeting of our basic necessities continue to elude us. We need to rethink our national priorities. To our development partners, it is usually said that it is folly to do the same thing over and over again in the same way, expecting different results. What can we do differently? Over 50 years of debt management, debt reprofiling, we are still food poor. Our people continue to go to bed hungry and wake up hungry. Our most potent resources, our young people, continue to languish in unemployment and risk their precious lives in the dreaded ocean in search of a better life. To our politicians, you continue to amaze us. You bemoan the prevalence of corruption in our dear motherland, yet you have the power in parliament to hold our government accountable. Right before you is a bill to check corruption from 2019. What urgency have you given to this? We look to you to address the issue of corruption with urgency. To our president and his team of ministers, take a deep breath. Look around you. Hear, see, and feel the pain of the Gambian people. The nation is hungry. The nation is angry. To our young people, times have changed. It is no longer business as usual. So at your attire-vous, co-create multiple revenue sources. Workers of 8 to 4, open side businesses, be innovative, brace up yourself, Gambia. Turbulent times are ahead. Yes, things are difficult. We will get hungrier. We will possibly get poorer. Prices will continue to go up, but no Gambian must give up. Let no hardship drive us into extremism that will destroy our social fabric. Let's keep hope alive. Don't be used by any interest group to destroy our dear motherland. And you young people, if you destroy this nation, you will have to live in it. To any individual or interest group that will seek to leverage these difficult times for chaos and unconstitutional change of government, we the people will resist you with our blood, our sweat, and our tears. For the bitter taste of dictatorship remains on our tongues. In spite of these trying times, fellow Gambians, we must resolve never to give up. We have outlived and outlasted 22 years of pain and distress. We will overcome the impact of 2019 and the impact of the Russian-Ukraine war. We are Gambia. We are the smiling coast. Let's keep the smile in the midst of the difficult times that we face. We will overcome. This too will come to pass. In conclusion, I call upon our government through our honorable minister. Let us sit as a people and talk to each other. We can solve the problems of this nation. No minister must think that he is more Gambian than the businessman or that one in civil society. We are born here, we have a stake here, and we are ready to solve the problems of our country. Let's sit together and speak as a family, as a people. We have called for a national dialogue to reprioritize and to chart a way forward. Let's do it together for love of this country, because this is our motherland and we love the Gambia. Thank you for your kind attention.
We're very busy, but notwithstanding, we cannot do it alone. And we all have one objective. If you have the same objective, you may have different strategies, but they can work together. And two heads are better than one. But I can tell you, points noted, Julie, on the issue of corruption. Well, of course, you don't need just legislation to fight corruption. We have had a taste of what it takes to close loopholes. And again, I will take this opportunity to tell you the priority direction and the Minister of Finance and the government overall, and the cabinet for that matter. We are working on enhancing public transparency, public accountability, and value for money expenditure. To those extent, we believe they are just nascent steps started, but the results have been eye-watering. One simple example we will say is, it's not only government that is corrupt. Corruption is a cross-cutting issue. And there is more corruption in the private sector than in the government. We all know the government represents a fraction of the overall economy. And government officials cannot do corruption among themselves. They do it jointly with the private sector. So to fight it, government is the wrong place to look for. I can tell you that. So a simple example we talk, and I was traveling with my colleague ministers at Brussels, and I wanted to run a simple experiment to say, well, let's look at people are accusing government officials of being corrupt. In Brussels airport, you have a cage where waters are water bottles, and you're told €1 each. You just put €1 and then you pick. And I said, I want to run a similar experiment in Gambia to see how people will react. And the feedback I got, you don't need to do it, because not even the water alone, but the money will all be taken away. So it was I couldn't even start it. But we've started nudging our way to fight. It's an endemic issue, and it's not unique to Gambia. One example I will say, I will quote here, which we did recently, was in June. We all know the Senegambia Bridge. The way the revenue was collected, it was managed by the revenue authority, like the ferry services. And I think that was the first trek we took to the provinces to see what's happening. We were not very convinced about the collection mechanism, and we changed it. Before the June 2021, The revenue collected for that month was 17 million. When we implemented the change, the revenue collected in June of 2022 was 47 million. And that's not enough. We continue to see increases month after month after month. And for the month of August, the revenue collected was 59 million. And this is exactly what simple, no technology, just a swap of rules. And we cannot do it alone. Gambia belongs to us all. Don't see us as ministers and see us as privileged ones. No, we have the hardest job, because to whom much is given, much is expected. And we are in charge of public posts, where the poorest of the poor's lives and livelihood are hoping on us. We are doing our best, but we cannot do it alone. And we will continue to leverage on partnership with the donor community, with the private sector, and of course, John, with the civil society. So I am pleased to have such a frank feedback, and feedback is the way forward. That's how you learn, that's how you grow. That's why when we are in school, our marks and essays are graded. Those grades are nothing but feedbacks. So thank you so much. I think I was more intrigued by John's comment, and it's a call to action. But a call to action that requires commitment, and talk is cheap. On the private sector, our engagement will be enhanced. We are looking at the private sector as the leading engine of growth, and the government has really gone out of its way to support the private sector by creating the enabling environment of rule of law, property rights, of course, albeit through slow judicial process, but that's what the situation is. And a number of incentives are created and are being created, and we have been calling on the private sector to take charge of the Gambian economy. Nobody can do it for us. If you look at the supply chain, the commodity prices, yes, global prices have gone up, but the operators in the private sector literally remit, because that was a question I asked the central bank some time back, to say, what is the retention period of the profits from the commercial activity? And it was very short. If we want to grow the economy, develop the country, Gambians must come forward and participate. From the redistributive trade to a number of businesses, these are run by, I wouldn't say non-Gambians, but participants whose economic interests are not very aligned with our national interests. So Gambians must take it up. It's very easy to blame government, but our government is an open door government, and we call on you to step forward. Like John's call to action to fight corruption. And I assure him, very shortly we'll roll out the Public Finance Act, a revised version that will tighten the loopholes, and will leverage on digitalization to reduce human interface and ensure accountability through technology. And that is one of the action points of His Excellency the President, by creating a specialized Ministry of Digital Technology. And that's why the business community, some of them have been giving feedback as to the increased custom duties. No duties have increased, but we launched the Pascuda wall that digitalizes the custom processing, and the limit and the existing loopholes that are there are being closed. So definitely we hear you, and we are listening government. This should not be the only session, and you don't have to wait to come here. Our doors are open. You are welcome at all times. But really, I'm impressed. Thanks. And a commercial bank to support a Gambian entrepreneur to import essential commodities. It was market driven. We led the commercial bank to vet the individual or prospective businesses, and they came out with a pick. We went ahead to issue a government support letter to that effect, and an LC was opened to the tune of more than $25 million for the importation of rice sugar. Unfortunately, the pilot did not succeed because the entrepreneur did not have the wherewithal. And literally, we believe the bank must have missed their credit assessment. So, but this scheme is still ongoing. And one aspect of this is we have a problem of credit vetting in the country. Because for a bank to vet a credit and it goes collapse, particularly in a pilot, but that is what it does. We must be very tolerant to risks and uncertainties because we must experiment. And this was the first experiment, but not the last. We will continue to do that. The scheme continued, and the scheme was taken over by another entrepreneur. And we have some pleasant observation, too early to conclude. And one commodity that has been the test is cooking oil. Cooking oil used to cost $2,300 a couple of months back. When these entrepreneurs entered the market space, today cooking oil is less than $2,000. It shows you the concentrated nature of the supply chain. And we have global price pressures for essential commodities, but the case of Gambia is a combination. You have global price increases, but at the same time there is concentrated supply. And unless we widen the supply base and encourage competition, the free market role of fixing the price as a truly functioning market mechanism will not work. Our early observation in the oil is a very encouraging factor. And in fact, as of yesterday, the feedback I got at wholesale level, the competition is bringing the price down to less than 1,700 at wholesale level. That shows you what we have done, and this experiment is going to continue. Not only that, the government, cognizant of the challenges, have made available an amount of more than $87 million from the reserves to support the importation of fuel and essential commodities in the last couple of months. And the targeted or the major beneficiaries of these were the oil marketing companies. Government has made, out of the 87 million, the oil marketing companies alone could receive more than 30 million. So, and in the oil marketing business, a large number of players there are the Gambian community, Gambian citizens. But we are not resting on our laurels. We shall continue to experiment. Economic management is experimentation, trials, and until we find the right fit. But one very important thing is, if we want to support Gambians, Gambians must be ready to support themselves. We have found causes why Gambians are not in business. And those businesses, those reasons are obvious, and we need to state that. It's unfortunate, if you look at the banks, among the portfolio of non-performing, the largest category are Gambians. And how do you build a business when the bank that support the financing is, you are not servicing your obligations? So to support Gambians, they should support themselves. How do they support themselves? By being upright, by honoring their financial obligation with the institutions that give them the credit, and making sure that, like for example, when you look at the collateral management of lending to Gambians, a typical Gambian loan will have the collateral overvalued. to the extent that in the event of a default, the bank is left with an empty paper. But unfortunately, the people whom you call non-nationals don't do that. So business work on trust, business work on sincerity. We are here to support everybody, but to support Gambians, Gambians must support themselves by doing business right. We're not saying they are not doing it, but if they want to, they have to do it right. I think that's my response to you. On the farmers, I think pricing, unfortunately, I do not determine what I should sell my product at. It's a market mechanism. When GGC buys those groundnuts, they are sold at the international market. And the international market is a function of supply and demand at global level. The increase in the price of fertilizer, even though it was an increase, it is still a subsidized price. Fertilizer is one of the casualties of the Russia-Ukraine war. But that being the case, it does not, of course, agriculture, that is the vulnerability of agriculture as a business. The input cost might not directly correlate with the output prices because you are not the only country in the market. If other countries don't have similar input pressures, world market is set, and as such, that is the clearing price. Currently, even as of last year, the record ground prices were at subsidized prices. And I think I'll take time to explain the impact of the agriculture sector on the physical space. The inputs are subsidized. Last year, we subsidized every bag of rice by more than 1,000. Prior to that, it was much more. But what we observe, that's the problem of some of these economic intervention or subsidies. A large quantity of those fertilizers, either across the border or when the groundnut was produced, was sold outside in prior years. Last year was an exception because our groundnut price was higher than Senegal. So that was one. Then even the market price that is normally quoted by the government is a subsidized price. So we have double jeopardy in the sense that we have subsidy in the input phase, subsidy at the output phase. At the end, government financial resources are spent and the farming community doesn't understand or appreciate. But of course, all of this is because we know these farmers, this is their only income in a year, and a subsidy of this nature in terms of supporting their agricultural productive activities in order. That is why we are looking at fully developing the social register to ensure our social intervention is means tested, because a blanket subsidy, as is happening now, it has a big drain on the public finances. And it's a world market price driven, and the level of pressures on the public purse is very immense. And unfortunately, I cannot call the final price or call the shots, but to move from 24 to 80, I think even mental arithmetic will tell you that's a tall order. Thank you.
The tourist sector collapsed. But we have seen with the framework that was in place, the situation in the Gambia, as the private sector mentioned, came out better than what we have observed in similar countries that are dependent.
Well, we needed to do it to stabilize society because we feel the pain. Don't forget, we all go to the same market and we know what's happening. So sometimes that's the continuous push and pull we have with the fund, that we are not running the economy on only your numbers. We have the social dimension as well. Thank you. And I think it's not wrong statistics that the women comprise 52% of this country. So no development priority that excludes half or more than half of your populace would be effective without that cohort or group being included. There are multiple prongs being taken to address the women welfare in the country. First, at the policy and political level, there is a dedicated ministry of gender to address women issues. And she's a female, she sits in cabinet, she's advocating for women and gender issues, particularly the vulnerable segment. Then we also have launched recently the Women Enterprise Fund, which had a first round of funding of more than 50 million, and another round of funding of more than 60 million is actually in the pipeline to address the women access to finance as a challenge. We are also working with development partners in the, if you could recall, all government projects have a gender dimension to address the women intervention requirement. And it is at a very nascent stage, but currently myself and the World Bank representative have discussed a fully fledged program as Women in Development type of outcome. It's at a very preparatory stage, but a dedicated intervention will be done, in addition to the ongoing women support area. But of course, we are also, even in the area of procurement, there is an uncodified but desired interest to have women active participation in public procurement. That's also going to likely take place. At the job level, I think if you look at the cabinet composition, the women representation is strong. Unfortunately, in the National Assembly, not, but that is people's choices. As far as government action is concerned, women are at the forefront of our priority areas. And this is ongoing. And the UNCDF intervention of access to finance will likely support the women group. Then the second question was that about communication. I think I will repeat, leadership and management is about communication, communication, communication. And there's a dedicated ministry of communication. All ministries have communications officers assigned, and there is this weekly show, I think maybe one of the few in the region, where every week a government spokesperson or a minister will be on West Coast Radio to really flesh out and communicate with the citizenry. So, well, of course, you cannot communicate enough. We had the feedback, we'll take that on board, but definitely we believe communication is priority, resources have been deployed, but we'll continue to endeavor to enhance our communication strategy as a government. On the budgetary allocation for the spot buying of groundnuts, these, I'm surprised to say that some farmers were not paid spot in the recent groundnut. In the last 2 seasons, this was done through the intervention of a private bank. And farmers' produce were supposed to have been bought on the spot. There could have been administrative delays of cash not reaching on time, but we have partnered with the government has signed a 3-year agreement with the private bank to facilitate purchase of groundnut on the spot. In the event that in the execution of that arrangement there is any hiccup, I think our ministry should be contacted right away to find out and engage the bank as to why there are delays. Because we take welfare of farmers very, very, very seriously, because their income is once in a year, and that should not be in due form, but should be paid on the spot. But of course, there could have been administrative bottlenecks, which we will take as a feedback in the implementation of the same scheme this year. The social safety net data that the UNICEF, we have the data for the major part of the country up to the west coast, but the western, the urban area is not covered. We expect to cover that in the oncoming census. And why this is very important, because the phenomenon of urban poverty is real. And poverty is no longer only in the rural area. We are cognizant of that. And to roll out a means testing, you need to have a national database. The social safety data will be updated to cover the country countrywide in the upcoming survey or subsequent to that. And it's an important priority for us to do as a government. I think those are the questions, unless I missed out any. Oh, of course, the education sector, the academia will be invited to learn from your models. But one thing I will always, I think when the crisis hit, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer went to brief the Queen, the question was, haven't you people, the economists, have your model not seen the crisis? So we'll look forward to you predicting what will happen. Thank you.
Speech, end of the closing remarks, because I'm doing this on behalf of my boss. So let me start by extending his regrets of the governor of the central bank, Mr. Bouassedi, for not being here. He's under the weather. So he asked me to come in and deliver. You can blame him for that afterwards when you meet him. And I quote, Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, UN Resident Coordinator, members of the UN country team and development partners, Your Excellency, former Vice President, Secretary General of the Government Civil Service, permanent secretaries, senior government officials, members of the private sector, members of the press and civil society organizations, as demonstrated by Mr. Njai, the person here shown here, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols duly observed. Let me take this opportunity to thank the IMF and UN country team for organizing this particularly important time when economists around the world are encountering challenges of monumental proportions. As we've already heard, there are unprecedented times, and we are amongst them. And we in the developing countries are at crucial crossroads. The multiple overlapping and compounding crises are exposing the fragility and vulnerabilities of our economies and threatening to reverse decades of developmental gains. A painful combination of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the growing impact of climate change, rising debt levels, as IMF has mentioned here, commodity price shocks, as we've also experienced, and rising interest rates in advanced economies is causing enormous economic challenges and financial losses in the economy of developing countries, and also deepening the development challenges we are tackling. Now, the repercussions of the conflict in Ukraine in particular on global commodity prices created global supply chains and international trade disruptions. This has prompted global inflation to rise to levels not seen in recent times, with compounding impact on low-income countries such as the Gambia. Despite our limited resources, we were able to navigate the COVID-19 shock, as we have had mentioned numerously this morning. And this is because of the inherent resilience of the economy, combined with effectiveness of policies and interventions that the government and partners have embarked upon. And in this regard, we would like to thank partners like the IMF, the World Bank, the EU, African Development Bank, the US, among others. The economy avoided recession in 2020 and registered stronger growth rate of 4.3% in 2021, and is poised for even more robust growth this year. However, the unfolding war in Ukraine presents significant headwinds to these prospects, and these are proving very difficult to surmount. But we are positive that we will be able to surmount them in due course. As a net importer of food and energy, the gyration in global commodity prices continues to transmit into our domestic prices, pushing domestic inflation to 13.3% as of September 2022, something again not seen in the Gambia in the past 2 decades. This has triggered a dramatic rise in cost of living, making us vulnerable to food insecurity, as we've had, as it is the poor that is the hardest hit. So we are also concerned about this. The terms of trade shock continue to negatively impact on our balance of payments. The current account balance deteriorated on account of rising import bill, reflecting surges in commodity prices, and partly because of the high cost of international shipment as well. Alongside supply-side constraints, these developments created excess demand for foreign currency causing acute shortage and putting pressure on the dalasi. And that, in part, Mr. Job explains part of the problems that you have mentioned. But we can come to that later. Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as policymakers, we understand the frustration and we feel the pain. As the Minister has said, we also go to the same markets. I must admit that this is not the happiest times for any policymaker. And Mr. you are right that you are an engineer, and so you will not be confronting what we are dealing with right now, the pain we are facing ourselves right now. It's not an option to sit and think that problems will go away without any action. But the pandemic has left us with limited resource space. And this calls for the innovation, and some of which you'll be hearing shortly from the central bank as well. In addition, it is a difficult balancing act to fight inflation without affecting growth. But we need to keep inflation down because we want to make sure that the wealth that is created, it keeps its value. Because inflation goes up, the value of the wealth goes down. In addition, it's difficult to keep the economy going without injecting finance into the capital, into the economy. That needs to see jobs created, that needs to see vulnerable people protected in the society, and to keep fiscal policy on a sustainable path. Well, despite this complicated trade-off, we at the Central Bank are focusing our energies on reducing inflation because it is a threat to long-term growth prospects and a burden to individuals and families that dedicate large proportions of their earnings to provide the basic necessities of life. In this regard, we have started a series of policy tightening measures to tame the inflation. The MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee of the bank, has cut the key policy rates by 200 basis points in the last 2 meetings we had, and an option for further tightening is on the table. To help ease the foreign currency supply challenges, the central bank sold an excess of $87 million from our reserves from January to date, and you've had the Honorable Minister mention that. This is to ensure continued availability of essential commodities, namely rice, flour, sugar, onions, potatoes, and fuel. And we are not relenting until we win this fight to bring inflation down. We have done it before, and we know we can do it again. It is our fervent hope that with decisive policy actions alongside support from our development partners and a hope of better cropping season, a recovery in tourism this year, we will start seeing domestic price and exchange rate pressures to ease. Honorable Minister, you are President Coordinator, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Collaborating with the private sector, that is the linchpin of growth, attaining more resilient, durable, inclusive economic growth for the Gambia is not impossible. All we need is to join hands, and we've had it this morning here. Let us join hands and work together and achieve this aspiration and harness the opportunity that this gives. And I unquote. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before I close, I just want to share my perspective on what I had mentioned at the beginning of this speech that I'm doing on behalf of the governor. That I have to respond to Mr. Job, to put the context. Mr. Job was my classmate in 6th form. So he, the bright guys take engineering. So he's one of them, so they went engineering, and we took economics. We went, so now that's why I'm sitting here. So, but of course, he's about the brains of the Gambia. He's one of those who creates employment. He's bringing FDI, capital into the economy, and we really respect him. He's one of our colleagues that we really respect here. But Mr. Job, I have to disagree with you that there is an exchange rate policy that created the inflation. Actually, it's the other way around, but we'll have time to discuss that. What happened was the excess, the demand for commodities kept going. Ukraine war cut supply. There were supply constraints, so therefore, when you have supply lower than demand, prices go up. And Gambia being a small country, we are competing with all countries to buy those goods. So therefore, we have to pay more. Our importers ask for more. So they turn to us for the foreign exchange. So we ought to have to help. So therefore, a demand on the foreign exchange, a demand on the US dollars. So therefore, again, the dollar is depreciated. So that's the challenge we are facing. It's not us who pushed the price. It was a cost-push inflation from the outside that came into the economy that we are trying to deal with. And maybe I just want to clarify one thing on the reference rate. You've mentioned it, and I'm happy that you mentioned it here, because we've had some confusion, and even the IMF mission that was here, that conference some weeks ago, we had a very extensive discussions with this on this. There's some misunderstanding of the exchange rate, the reference rate. The reference rate is actually only a rate for the MTOs who are receiving the dollars from outside and the commercial banks. They receive the rates through the account in the commercial banks, and then they are supposed to sell it to the commercial banks. So there used to be a problem of how much do you sell it to. And then the central bank, so they were, for example, the central bank for sanity stepped in and said, now this reference rate, it should not be more than 2 percentage points above this rate. Now, what that we've noticed has been translated to mean to be used for all other transactions. But that is not the purpose of the reference. And we're working on, with the IMF, we're working on trying to rationalize all the reference rates and all the various rates in the market, in the economy, so that they all will be consistent for reference rates. So I hope the media can pick up from this and then convey this message as clearly as possible. And finally, I just want to mention the last point is that the exchange rate in the Gambia is flexible. It is flexible. We don't. The exchange is flexible. We are having a flexible exchange policy. It's not a fixed one. So that's why it is going up and down. So we are not dictating it. We are not trying to influence it. Of course, we try to influence by increasing supply to it, but through the market forces, rather than us tweaking with the rates from the central bank. Ladies and gentlemen, that was my intervention, and I thank you all for your time and for.
It was used to address this type of shocks, and we also did it for the floods, is to have a whole society response with a particular attention on social protection, and especially for the most vulnerables, but also looking at how to enhance and strengthen the MSMEs, especially in the private sector. This rising cost of prices and cost of living is a threat for all, but also for the implementation and the achievement of the SDGs. And in terms of diverting investment in the SDGs sectors, and I think what the minister shared this morning and how it's important to have a balance shows that this urgency mode needs mitigation measures that are critical for both the government and all development partners and civil society members and actors in the Gambia. The fact that we are also expecting the National Development Plan, which is a recovery focus, will give us an opportunity to highlight how best the approach that has been used since this shock, which is a whole society, can also be contained and maintained throughout the implementation and the development of the National Development Plan. It is therefore a delight to see that as government of the Gambia and in collaboration with all development partners and UN agencies, we are bringing these critical issues to the policy discussion table. And we are taking also the opportunity, and this is why we are taking the opportunity to thank you all who have participated in this very rich discussion, especially Honorable Minister, you and your colleagues and everybody who's here representing the government, Your Excellencies, our colleague from the UN system, and particularly the IMF for giving us the data, WFP and FAO, that will inform our policies, but also inform our reflection in the near future, and that all agencies that have been receiving this data, I think, is food for thought, but it's data that will help to inform our intervention in this future. I would like to just conclude in noting that this policy discussion is only the start of putting key policy issues on the table, as I just mentioned, and the actual work, even if ongoing, requires us to now work more collaboratively, as some of our brothers and sisters said, in mitigating the impact of these rising costs of living on the Gambia people, especially the most vulnerable the people living with disabilities, the women, and the whole society that is victim of this. So it's a moment of solidarity, as we always said, and we've been showing, we already showed that solidarity in previous shocks. And we know that the Gambia is capable of maintaining this solidarity moving forward, and the high potential that the Gambia has will continue to shine. So I just want to, in behalf of my colleagues and everybody who participated in preparing this event, to again congratulate the IMF, World Bank and all colleagues, and thank you and wish you a good afternoon, and reiterating our commitment to continue the collaboration. Thank you very much.